The telegram fluttered in Catherine Kelly's trembling hands as the stagecoach rumbled away, leaving her alone at the dusty crossroads with nothing but her weathered trunk and the bitter sting of rejection. Bride unsuitable stop to talkative stop return to sender stop. The yellow paper declared in cold, impersonal type that seemed to mock her very existence. Wyoming Territory, 1878. The late afternoon sun cast long shadows across the empty road as Catherine stood in her travel-worn blue dress, the same one she'd carefully selected for her arrival in Cottonwood Springs just 3 weeks prior. She traveled all the way from Boston after corresponding with Edward Thornton, a shopkeeper who had advertised for a bride in the Eastern papers. Now, instead of building a new life as Mrs. Thornton, she found herself abandoned at Miller's Crossing, a desolate stop between nowhere and nothing. "Miss, you planning to stand there till sundown?" The gruff voice startled her from her thoughts. Catherine turned to find a tall figure silhouetted against the setting sun. As he approached, she made out the details: worn leather boots, faded denim, a dust-covered tan hat pulled low over eyes that studied her with curiosity rather than judgment. I seem to have been left behind," she managed, hating how her voice cracked. The man glanced at the telegram still clutched in her hand, then at her trunk. Understanding dawned in his kind eyes. She noticed the color of summer skies. "Mail order situation gone wrong?" he asked quietly. Catherine lifted her chin. "Mr. Thornton found me unsuitable. Apparently, I speak too much for his liking." To her surprise, the stranger's mouth curved into a genuine smile. "Some men can't appreciate a good conversation. I'm Daniel Whelan. Own a cattle ranch about 5 miles north." "Catherine Kelly," she replied, extending her hand as propriety dictated, though she felt anything but proper standing abandoned at a crossroads in the middle of nowhere. Daniel's calloused hand enveloped hers briefly. "Well, Miss Kelly, there's a storm brewing, and Miller's Crossing isn't much more than this way station. Nearest town is Cottonwood Springs, but that's 15 miles south." "Yes, I'm aware," Catherine said, unable to keep the bitterness from her voice. "I've just come from there." Daniel nodded, studying the darkening horizon. "I can offer you a place to stay tonight. My sister Martha keeps house for me. Tomorrow we can figure out your next steps." Catherine hesitated. She'd been raised to be cautious of strangers, especially men. But the alternative was spending the night alone at an abandoned way station with a storm approaching. "I appreciate your kindness, Mr. Whelan, but I wouldn't want to impose." "No imposition. Martha will be glad for female company." He paused, then added with a hint of humor, "Fair warning, though she talks even more than I do." Despite everything, Catherine found herself smiling. "In that case, I accept your offer." Daniel loaded her trunk onto his wagon, then helped her up onto the wooden seat. As they set off, the first rumble of thunder rolled across the plains. "Mr. Thornton's a fool," Daniel said suddenly, eyes fixed on the road ahead. "Some people's words are just the music others haven't learned to appreciate yet." Catherine glanced at him, surprised by the unexpected poetry from this weathered cowboy. "That's a rather beautiful way to look at it." He shrugged, seemingly embarrassed. "Just something my pa used to say." The wagon jolted over the uneven trail as Catherine considered her situation. She'd spent her last dollars on the stagecoach fare, believing she was traveling toward a new husband and a new life. Now she was headed to a stranger's ranch with no plan beyond tomorrow. "You're thinking mighty hard over there," Daniel observed. "I'm wondering what happens now," Catherine admitted. "I came west with specific intentions that have fallen through." "West's full of new beginnings," Daniel replied. "One door closes, another opens. That's been my experience." The rain began as they crested a hill, revealing a modest ranch nestled in a protected valley. A two-story wooden house stood at its center, with a barn and several outbuildings nearby. Lamplight glowed in the windows, a beacon against the gathering storm. "Welcome to the Double W," Daniel said as he guided the horses toward the house. They barely made it to the covered porch before the skies opened completely. A woman with Daniel's same blue eyes opened the door, surprise evident on her face. "Danny, you've brought company? In this weather?" "Martha, this is Miss Catherine Kelly. She's had a difficult day." "Miss Kelly, my sister Martha." Martha Whelan was a sturdy woman in her early 30s with a kind face and practical clothing. She took one look at Catherine's travel-worn appearance and ushered her inside. "You poor thing, you're half frozen. Come in by the fire. Danny, bring her trunk to the spare room, then see to the horses." Before Catherine could properly thank Daniel, Martha had her seated by the hearth with a cup of hot coffee in her hands. The house was modest but immaculately kept, with simple furniture and handmade quilts adding color to the rooms. "Now," Martha said, sitting opposite Catherine, "I won't pry, but if you'd like to talk about whatever brought you to our doorstep, I'm a good listener." The kindness undid her. Catherine found herself recounting the whole humiliating story, the months of correspondence with Edward Thornton, the long journey west, and the 3 weeks of increasingly strained interaction before he'd put her on the stagecoach with a terse note explaining she wasn't what he'd expected. "He said I talked too much," Catherine finished, staring into her coffee cup, "that I had opinions on everything and couldn't seem to hold my tongue when proper women should remain silent." Martha snorted inelegantly. "Sounds like Edward Thornton needed a doormat, not a wife. Good riddance, I say." "But what am I to do now?" Catherine asked. "I've spent everything getting here. I have nowhere to go, no family back east willing to take me in." "You'll stay here until you sort things out," Martha declared with finality. "We've plenty of room, and I could use the help with canning season coming. Danny won't mind." As if summoned by his name, Daniel entered, shaking rain from his hat. "Mind what?" "Miss Kelly staying with us for a while," Martha answered. Daniel hung his wet coat by the door. "Already suggested as much. Now who's hungry? That ride worked up my appetite something fierce." Over a simple but hearty meal of stew and biscuits, Catherine observed the easy rapport between the siblings. They teased and interrupted each other with the comfortable familiarity of people who truly enjoyed one another's company. "How long have you had this ranch?" Catherine asked. "Going on 10 years, Daniel answered. "Came out from Missouri after the war. Started with just 20 acres and a few head of cattle. Now we're up to 1,500 acres and 300 head. Danny built most of this house himself," Martha added proudly. "Started with just 2 rooms, and we've been adding on ever since." "It's lovely," Catherine said sincerely. "You've created something wonderful here." Daniel's eyes met hers briefly. "It's a work in progress, like most worthwhile things." Later, settled in the small but comfortable guest room, Catherine stood by the window watching the storm rage outside. For the first time since receiving that devastating telegram, she felt a flicker of hope. Perhaps there could be a future for her here in the West after all, different from what she'd planned, but possibly better. Morning dawned clear and bright, the storm having washed everything clean. Catherine woke to the scent of coffee and bacon, and the low murmur of voices from the kitchen. She dressed quickly in her second-best dress and made her way downstairs. Daniel sat at the table, his hat beside him, deep in conversation with Martha. They both looked up as Catherine entered. "Good morning," she said, suddenly self-conscious. "I hope I'm not late for breakfast." "Not at all," Martha assured her, pouring a cup of coffee. "Danny was just saying he could use some help with the ledgers and correspondence." "He mentioned you were educated." Catherine nodded cautiously. "Yes, I attended the Boston Ladies' Seminary. I'm proficient in mathematics, literature, and correspondence. Daniel cleared his throat. Ranch is doing well enough that I've been thinking of hiring someone to help with the books. Been putting it off because, well, not many qualified folks out here. If you're interested, it could be a way for you to earn some money while you decide your next steps. Catherine stared at him, wondering if this was charity disguised as employment. Are you certain? I have no experience with ranching. Don't need ranching experience to add figures and write letters, Daniel replied pragmatically. And I've never met anyone who enjoys those tasks. I'd rather be out with the cattle than stuck at a desk. It wasn't what she'd come west for, but it was honest work and a chance to regain her independence. Then I accept, Mr. Whelan. Thank you. Daniel, he corrected. If we're working together, might as well use first names. Daniel? She repeated, and something warm unfurled in her chest at the simple intimacy of it. The days fell into a pleasant rhythm. Mornings, Catherine worked in Daniel's small office off the main house, organizing years of haphazardly kept records and correspondence. Afternoons, she helped Martha with household tasks, learning the practical skills of Western living that her Boston education hadn't covered. Evenings were spent by the hearth, talking and sometimes reading aloud from the small collection of books the Whelans possessed. Through it all, Catherine found herself watching Daniel the way he spoke to his ranch hands with respect, how he listened attentively when anyone spoke, the quiet competence with which he handled every task. He wasn't handsome in the conventional way of Boston gentlemen, but his features had a rugged appeal that she found increasingly attractive. More compelling was his mind. Behind his straightforward manner lay a thoughtful intelligence and unexpected depths. He'd read more than she would have guessed, borrowing books whenever he made the journey to Cheyenne. When she expressed surprise at finding a volume of Tennyson among his possessions, he'd simply shrugged and said, "Words paint pictures nothing else can." A month into her stay, Catherine rode out with Daniel to check on a section of fence that had been reported damaged. She'd become comfortable on horseback, another skill she'd never imagined needing in Boston. "You've taken to ranch life better than I expected," Daniel observed as they rode side by side across the rolling grassland. "I've had excellent teachers," she replied, "though I still can't bring myself to help with the calving." Daniel laughed, the sound warming her more than the autumn sunshine. "That's specialized work. No shame in leaving it to those with the stomach for it." They reached the damaged section of fence, and Daniel dismounted to examine it. Catherine followed, holding the horse's reins while he assessed the broken posts. "Looks deliberate," he said grimly, running his hand along a clean cut-in-one post. "Someone's been tampering." Catherine frowned. "Who would do such a thing?" "Could be Clayton Reed. He's been trying to buy this section of my land for years. Controls the water access to the north." Daniel straightened up, his expression troubled. "He's not a man who takes no for an answer. Surely he wouldn't resort to sabotage? Wouldn't put it past him. Reed wants what he wants, and he's used to getting it." Daniel remounted his horse. "I'll send some men out to repair this tomorrow, and we'll keep a closer watch." As they rode back, Catherine considered how complicated this seemingly simple life could be. Land disputes, water rights, harsh weather, predators both animal and human. The challenges were endless. "You look pensive," Daniel noted. "I'm thinking about how different this is from what I expected," she admitted. "When I agreed to marry Edward Thornton, I imagined a comfortable life in town, helping in his shop, raising children. I never pictured myself riding fence lines and worrying about water rights." Daniel was quiet for a moment. "Do you regret it? Coming west?" Catherine considered the question carefully. "No," she finally said. "I think I was meant to be here, just not in the way I originally thought." His eyes met hers, and something unspoken passed between them. "I'm glad you think so," he said softly. That evening, as they sat on the porch watching the sunset paint the sky in brilliant oranges and pinks, Catherine found herself talking about her childhood in Boston, her dreams, her disappointments. Daniel listened, really listened, in a way Edward Thornton never had. "I always talked too much, even as a child," she confessed. "My mother was constantly reminding me that men don't like women with too many opinions." "Your mother was wrong," Daniel said simply. "Some men are threatened by women who think for themselves. Others find it the most attractive quality there is." Catherine glanced at him, wondering which category he fell into, but his expression revealed nothing as he gazed at the horizon. The next day brought Clayton Reed himself to the W. Catherine was working in the office when she heard the commotion outside, horses arriving, men's voices raised in argument. She moved to the window and saw Daniel confronting a well-dressed man flanked by two rough-looking cowboys. Martha appeared at her side. "That's Reed," she said grimly. "Never brings good news." Catherine followed Martha outside, where Daniel stood his ground against the older man. "I'm making you a fair offer, Whelan," Reed was saying, his voice carrying across the yard. "More than fair, considering the circumstances." "The circumstances being that you've cut my fences and driven off my cattle?" Daniel replied evenly. "No thank you, Reed. My answer hasn't changed." Reed noticed the women then, his gaze lingering on Catherine in a way that made her skin crawl. "I see you've acquired new help since I was last here. Didn't realize the W was prospering so much." "Miss Kelly is my bookkeeper," Daniel said, stepping slightly in front of Catherine. "And this conversation is finished. Please leave my property." Reed smiled unpleasantly. "For now. But you should know, Whelan, I've filed paperwork questioning your water rights. Could take months to sort out in court. Months during which your cattle might get mighty thirsty." After Reed departed, Daniel's face was tight with anger. "He's bluffing about the water rights. My claim is solid." "But can you afford to fight him in court?" Catherine asked practically. Daniel's silence was answer enough. That night, Catherine couldn't sleep. The confrontation with Reed had made her realize how precarious the ranch's situation might be, and by extension, her own position. She'd begun to feel at home here, to care deeply for both Whelans. The thought of losing this newfound security made her chest ache. Unable to rest, she lit a lamp and went downstairs, intending to make herself some tea. To her surprise, Daniel was already in the kitchen, sitting at the table with papers spread before him. "Couldn't sleep either?" she asked softly. He looked up, fatigue evident in his face. "Trying to figure out how to fight Reed if he follows through on his threat." Catherine sat across from him, studying the documents, property deeds, water rights certificates, bank statements. "May I?" Daniel nodded, pushing the papers toward her. She spent an hour going through everything methodically, asking occasional questions. Finally, she looked up. "The water rights are solid, just as you said. But Reed is counting on the fact that a court battle would drain your resources before a judgment could be reached." "Exactly," Daniel sighed, running a hand through his hair. "He knows I'd have to sell eventually." Catherine tapped her finger thoughtfully against the table. "What if we could prove he's been sabotaging your property? That would undermine any legal case he might bring. We'd need evidence. Solid evidence." "Then let's get some," Catherine said decisively. "Set a trap." Daniel looked at her with new appreciation. "You've got a strategic mind, Catherine Kelly." "I talk a lot, but I also listen," she replied with a small smile. "And I've been paying attention to everything you and Martha have taught me about how things work out here." Their plan was simple but effective. They spread word that Daniel would be traveling to Cheyenne for several days, leaving the ranch undermanned. In reality, he and several loyal hands remained hidden, watching key areas of the property. Catherine insisted on helping with the surveillance, despite Daniel's concerns for her safety. "I'm already involved," she argued, "and four eyes are better than two," which was how she found herself hiding in a small copse of trees near the northern property line, with Daniel beside her, on the second night of their stakeout. The autumn night was cool, and she was grateful for the heavy coat Martha had insisted she take. "You should have stayed at the house," Daniel whispered as they settled in for the long wait. "And miss all this adventure?" Catherine replied, trying to mask her nervousness with humor. "Besides, I'm curious to see if our plan works." Daniel chuckled softly. "You truly aren't like any woman I've ever met. Is that good or bad?" In the moonlight, she could just make out his profile as he turned to her. "Very good," he said simply. They lapsed into companionable silence, broken only by the occasional soft comment or observation. Catherine found herself acutely aware of Daniel's proximity, the warmth of his shoulder occasionally brushing hers as they huddled in their hiding spot. Near midnight, they heard the soft approach of horses. Daniel tensed beside her, his hand moving to the rifle lying across his lap. Catherine held her breath as 3 riders came into view, moving with deliberate stealth toward the fence line. "Reed's men," Daniel breathed in her ear. They watched as the men dismounted and began working on the fence, clearly intending to cut through it. Daniel waited until they were fully engaged in their sabotage before making his move. "That's far enough," he called out, rising from their hiding place with his rifle aimed. "Hands where I can see them." The next few moments were chaos. 2 of the men immediately raised their hands, but the third went for his gun. There was a shot Catherine wasn't sure from whom, and then the third man was on the ground clutching his arm, cursing loudly. "Catherine, stay back," Daniel ordered as he approached the men cautiously. She ignored him, heart pounding as she moved to his side. "Are you all right?" "Fine," he said tersely, his attention on the wounded man. "That's just a graze. You'll live to stand trial." By morning, the 3 saboteurs were locked in the Cottonwood Springs jail, and Catherine was back at the ranch with Martha, both women anxiously awaiting Daniel's return from town. When he finally rode in, his expression was grimly satisfied. "Reed's men talked," he announced as they gathered in the kitchen. "Admitted he paid them to damage the property, hoping to drive down my cattle prices so I'd be forced to sell. Sheriff's bringing him in for questioning." "Will it stick?" Martha asked skeptically. "Maybe, maybe not. But Reed's reputation will take a hit either way." Daniel's eyes found Catherine's. "It was a good plan. Couldn't have done it without you." Martha looked between them, a knowing smile playing at her lips. "I think I'll go check on the preserves," she said, making a transparent excuse to leave them alone. When she was gone, Daniel moved closer to Catherine. "You could have been hurt last night." "But I wasn't," she pointed out. "And we succeeded." "Yes, we did." He took her hand, his calloused fingers gentle against hers. "Catherine, I need to say something, and I'm not as good with words as you are." Her heart began to race. "You don't need to be good with words. Just honest." "Honest, then." Daniel took a deep breath. "When you first came here, I thought you'd stay a few days, maybe a week, then move on. I never expected you." Catherine waited, hardly daring to breathe. "The way you talk, the way your mind works, the things you notice that others miss, it's like music to me," he continued, his voice rough with emotion. "I've spent my whole life in quiet, and I never knew what I was missing until you filled it with your words." Tears pricked at Catherine's eyes. "Daniel, I'm falling in love with you," he said simply. "And I know it's fast, and I know you came here with different plans. But..." Catherine silenced him by stepping forward and placing her fingers gently against his lips. "It's not too fast. Not when it's right." Their first kiss was tentative, a question asked and answered in the press of lips. The second was a conversation without words, deep and true. When they finally parted, Catherine felt as though something fundamental had shifted within her, like puzzle pieces falling into their proper places. "I came west to be a wife," she whispered against his cheek. "Just not to the man I expected." Word spread quickly through the territory about how Daniel Whelan and his Eastern bookkeeper had outsmarted Clayton Reed. The legal threats evaporated as Reed found himself fighting to salvage his own reputation instead. By winter, the Double W was secure again, and Catherine had fully integrated herself into ranch operations. They married on Christmas Day, with Martha beaming beside them and the entire ranch staff in attendance. Catherine wore a new blue dress that Martha had helped her sew, with tiny white flowers embroidered along the collar, Daniel's favorite wildflowers that bloomed across their land each spring. "I, Daniel, take you, Catherine," he vowed in a voice that carried clearly through the small church, "to be my wife. I promise to listen to every word you speak, to cherish your thoughts as the gifts they are, and to love you through all the stories we'll create together." Catherine, for once in her life, found herself almost speechless with joy. Almost. "I, Catherine, take you, Daniel, to be my husband. I promise to share my words and my silence with you, to build our life with both actions and dreams, and to love you through all the chapters yet to come." Spring brought new calves to the Double W, summer a bountiful garden, and autumn the news that Catherine was expecting their first child. Their joy was complete when Martha announced her engagement to James Foster, the widowed blacksmith from Cottonwood Springs who had been calling on her with increasing frequency. "I was beginning to think she'd never find someone who could keep up with her talking," Daniel teased as they sat on the porch swing one evening, Catherine's head resting on his shoulder. "The right person doesn't try to keep up," Catherine mused, her hand resting on her growing belly. "They simply love the rhythm of your particular conversation." Daniel placed his hand over hers. "Our child is going to be the most well-spoken in the territory, with you as their mother, and the most thoughtful with you as their father." As twilight deepened into night, Catherine thought about the journey that had brought her here, the rejection that had felt like an ending, but had actually been the beginning she needed. Edward Thornton had found her too talkative, too opinionated, too much. Daniel Whelan found her words to be music, her opinions valuable, her very self exactly right. "What are you thinking about?" Daniel asked, his arm tightening around her. "About how sometimes life's greatest disappointments lead to our greatest joys," she replied. "If Edward Thornton hadn't rejected me, I would never have found you." "I've always believed things happen for a reason," Daniel said, "though I never expected that reason to arrive on a stagecoach with a trunk full of books and a head full of wonderful ideas." Catherine laughed, the sound carrying across the land they'd fought for and would pass on to their children, land that had become home in every sense of the word. "Tell me more about these wonderful ideas," Daniel prompted, settling more comfortably beside her. And Catherine did, her words flowing freely into the night, creating the music they both loved, the sound of a life being lived fully, honestly, and together.